Thank you, Marcus. And indeed, I was just supposed to be the comic relief at the end of Noelia's talk. Nonetheless, it hopefully will be of interest to you. So the talk is about the geology of Mount Stromlo and the surrounding region. Geology is a common interest of myself and my partner, Anne. And Anne and her father, David, are both geologists, so they've had insight to offer into this. And really this project was something that was actually happening about 12 months ago during COVID isolation. The benefits of living up here on the mountain was that the Stromlo Forest Park, which does include all the areas to the west of Stromlo, was there waiting for us to escape the insanity of confinement. And so Anne and myself set off on various field trips, collecting rocks and studying the environment, till eventually the children started protesting because the lounge room was being taken over by rock samples, and I began to move them back out to their rightful place. The geological epoch that the activity was happening was in the Silurian, so about 420, give or take, million years ago. Now, notably, during the period in question, Gondwana land was still intact, and the area that we're really talking about was here on the eastern edge of what was later to become the Australian plate, where the Pacific plate was subducting underneath Gondwana land. And when that happens, and this process still continues all around the ring of fire in the Pacific, for instance, you get these volcanic island arcs. Now, in essence, what happens in this process is when the oceanic plate is subducted underneath a continental plate, then all of the hydrated minerals in that oceanic plate, once they're subjected to the temperature and pressure, then the presence of that water causes the rocks to melt more easily, and you finish up with this layer of magma, of buoyant magma, kind of trapped between this oceanic plate that's being subducted and the overriding plate. And so you get all this volcanic activity. And that is what was happening on the eastern side of Gondwana land in the Silurian. One of the other really interesting processes that's at play here is continental plates can collect terranes. So these terranes are effectively where part of another continental plate gets sutured, literally sewn onto the side of the overriding plate. And certainly in the case of Australia, then there's this really marked distinction between these terrane regions that make up kind of the eastern side of Australia and the more archaic kind of mostly sedimentary Australian plate. Canberra, obviously, and the region that we're talking about, specifically here at Stromlo, is within one of these terrane regions where you've had this volcanic arc activity, which has formed the volcanoes, and then eventually that these geological units have been collected by the Australian plate on its way over and collected and attached to the eastern side of the plate. So really the point of this slide is just to show that unlike areas further west, the geology in this area is really very local and quite complex. So if you look even in Western New South Wales, then you've often got the same sort of sedimentary geological units that extend for hundreds of kilometres. To look at the landscape around here, you would think, okay, here's Stromlo, there's Black Mountain, there's Mount Painter, just between here and Belconnen. And you would think, okay, there's three hills, they're clearly all related by some geological process some time ago. But in fact, even these three adjacent hills have completely different geology. So the Mount Painter volcanics was a very distinct event from what I'm going to talk about with Stromlo, whereas Black Mountain is actually made of sedimentary material. And so there's really that sort of level of localism in the geology of the ACT. Here, I really just wanted to highlight a couple of key formations that will feature in the talk. So in particular here at Stromlo, we have Laidlaw Volcanics, and that's over the top of the Yarralumla Formation. Is basically a sedimentary formation that appears only in some places, but then that's over the top of the Hawkins Volcanics. Now, what's interesting, just to let you get your bearings there, you can see the observatory, and up in the top left, you can see the Murrumbidgee. Most of the area that we surveyed was that kind of Stromlo Forest Park area just to the west of Stromlo. So this is the same map with the geological units overlaid. So as mentioned, it's the Laidlaw Volcanics that we will focus on. Between here and Uriara Road, basically, you've got this fault, the Winslade Fault. And so on the other side of that fault are the Hawkins Volcanics, which you saw from that stratigraphic diagram, were deposited much earlier than the Laidlaw Volcanics, but because of the vertical displacement along that Winslade Fault, the Laidlaw and any overlying layers have been eroded. And you can really see this, although it's not an obvious step change when you're cycling. You can see the Laidlaw rocks, and then you hop off your bike 20 metres and look at the ground, and it's really quite obviously distinct along that fault. The Laidlaw Formation, as mentioned, does extend from here up to sort of Yass, give or take, where there's been these faults and it has been eroded away. But I do not specifically mean to suggest that Stromlo itself as a hill in its current form was kind of the centre of this volcanic activity. The actual regional centres of the volcanic eruptions aren't known. So we're now talking about the local, the ground beneath our feet, if you will, the Laidlaw volcanics. And in particular, the dominant rock type here at Stromlo is this rhyodacite ignimbrite. Now, rhyodacite refers to the mineralogy of the rock. And although I'm not particularly familiar with it, geologists use these QAPF diagrams where you've got quartz and the plagioclase. And so where you've got extrusive lava, then depending on the mineral composition of that, you can place it somewhere on this diagram, and that immediately tells you a lot about the characteristics of that extrusive material. So in particular, rhyodacite extrusive magma is really viscous. And so you tend to get these explosive eruptions rather than a lava flow like you do, for instance, there's, flooding basalts around the world. Whereas here Stromlo is having the rhyodacite mineralogy is much more, it was a much more explosive event. Now the ignimbrite refers to the makeup of the rock. So in particular, an ignimbrite has a matrix material which is formed basically from the ash of pyroclastic flows. And so when you look at the rocks all around here, such as the rock wall that's just outside this building and outside AITC, or any of the other rocks, including the one on the drive-in, then that black kind of fine matrix is essentially the ash from these pyroclastic eruptions. Now, this kind of rock that has a distinct difference between the matrix material with larger identifiable crystals within it is a porphyritic rock. And the individual kind of crystals that you can see that form as the magma cools are called phenocrysts. Now, one of the things that was interesting when we started exploring the area is that you find all these rocks that just don't quite look like the Laidlaw rhyodacite ignimbrite. And so this is a diagram that eventually I figured out, it became clear that it's just the weathering process, and you really can identify a continuum as these rocks become more weathered. So here on the left-hand side, there's the fresh Laidlaw, which is very distinctive and easy to identify. Then there's all the various shades of grey through the middle till eventually you reach the point on the right-hand side where that matrix material has fully eroded away and the rock is decomposed, leaving, basically just leaving the harder phenocrysts behind, which are just the perfect size for ants to transport around. And so it's really interesting looking at the ants' nests, and you can kind of pick them up, and it's basically a natural process that sorts out these phenocrysts because they're just the right size as the ants excavating their little cities. So apart from that sort of most common base rock that constitutes Stromlo, there's a few other interesting types of rock around. So the geological maps highlight this area just to the north of Stromlo, basically between Stromlo and Uriyara Road. And for people that drive Uriyara Road, we're kind of talking about where the big water reservoir tanks are that you see on your left as you're heading out of Canberra. That particular region is still very much related to the Laidlaw volcanics, but it's what they describe in the literature as tufaceous sandstone. So tuff refers to sort of the presence of ashfall, and you can see on the microscope picture I took there that this is much more complex. You've got bits of quartz and sand and ash and all kinds of material that are all mixed up in this sandstone. And basically this forms where there's ashfall in a marine environment. And so you can literally picture an event like this being what has contributed to the formation of that tufaceous sandstone just on the northern side of Stromlo. One of the other things that isn't described anywhere in the literature that we came across was a different kind of material. And so in that GIS map, that's the blue dots, and it's kind of really quite densely interbedded with the Laidlaw volcanics. In that photo, Ian has 1 foot on Laidlaw bedrock and another foot on this other material. So David Gibson pointed out actually that this other material that you see is basically metamorphosed quartz. So it's really fine grains effectively of sand that have then been cooked and fused together. And so, for example, the first place we noticed this was on Brown Hill, which is the next hill over with the trig marker on top of it. But there are numerous outcrops of this kind of randomly throughout the area just to the west of Stromlo. And I kind of mentally picture the formation of this quartzite, I guess, being sort of a modified metamorphic sandstone. It's possibly been contact metamorphism, where you've got an idyllic beach that is then being cooked by a lava flow. In truth, maybe it's more that there was some kind of existing sandstone material that was the bedrock at the time that has been metamorphically modified. These particular rocks have been one of the main things that we've been trying to understand how they have formed. So in conclusion, I guess, the rocks here at Stromlo were formed by these kind of explosive pyroclastic flows about 420 million years ago. And of course, over that period, the entire geological unit has probably been buried and then re-exposed. And there's, accreted onto the Australian plate, and there's been a lot of history between the formation and now. But maybe next time you walk outside and you see these distinctive rocks with the phenocrysts in them, then you'll have some understanding about how it all came about anyway. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. That was a fantastic talk, really interesting. Can we get a geological explanation for the road as well?
Yeah.
Why it's so shocking?
I was thinking about this actually, and I think part of it is probably because you've got this non-porous rock. You've got this really hard rock, and so that's why you tend to get all of the seeps, all of these springs all over Stromlo. Is you get all of this subsurface water transport. And I'm probably kind of parroting stuff that Anne has told me, because Anne is a hydrogeologist. That because you've just got the water bubbling up from the ground continuously, then it's a pretty difficult surface to maintain a road on.
I'm asking this on behalf of my 4-year-old. Have you found any dinosaur bones fossil?
Really good question. So actually one of the things that I meant to mention is, so the Silurian period was sufficiently long ago in Earth's history that that's just about when the first fish with jaws were beginning to evolve, and when plants were very first starting to colonize the Earth's surface, the ground plants. So much of the surface of the Earth was still barren, except for these kind of 6 centimetre high plants that occupied kind of coastal lowlands. So no dinosaur bones, sorry.
Thanks, David. That's really interesting. Can I just ask a simple question about the weathering process? If you cracked open one of those more weathered rocks, would it look fresh inside?
Certainly, if you find some of the rocks that just have a weathered exterior and crack it open, then there's still fresh Laidlaw on the inside. But more generally, I think there's entire outcrops of the rock that have been weathered completely. Now, if I get this word right, Anne, I think saprolitic rocks are where a lot of that kind of matrix material has weathered away, but maintained the basic structure of the rock. And so that's why in some of the places, like just down behind Howie's shed and my place, they've quarried the material because you end up with basically really nice gravel at about the scale size of those phenocrysts, because the finer matrix has weathered away, kind of leaving this stuff more like a gravelly soil. So it has maintained the structure of the original Laidlaw rhyodacite ignimbrite, but meanwhile the actual glue holding it together has weathered away large sections of it.